Beijing just did something that almost never happens in modern M&A. It ordered a company to undo a deal that had already closed. The company is Manus, the Chinese AI agent startup that briefly became a darling of the tech press earlier this cycle. The buyer was Meta. And according to Bloomberg, the Cyberspace Administration of China has told Manus that the acquisition cannot stand. The reported response from the founders is, in its own way, even more striking. They are now raising roughly $1 billion in fresh capital to buy the operation back from Meta. Let's be clear about what that means. A U.S. tech giant bought a Chinese AI company. The deal closed. Money changed hands. Engineers presumably got onboarded. And now, after the fact, Beijing is saying, rewind the tape. Post-close M&A reversals are not a normal feature of the deal landscape. They happen, occasionally, when regulators force a divestiture over competition concerns. They happen when fraud surfaces. They almost never happen because a national government decides, in hindsight, that the deal shouldn't have been allowed at all. In modern history, you can count the number of post-close acquisitions that have been forcibly reversed by a sovereign regulator on roughly one hand. Deal certainty. The principle that once you've signed and closed and registered, the transaction stays closed, is a foundational expectation of global capital markets. Manus is now a data point against it. To understand why this matters, you have to understand what Manus actually is. The company built one of the more talked-about autonomous agent products of the last year. A system that could plan multi-step tasks, browse, write code, and execute work on a user's behalf without constant prompting. Whether the underlying tech was as advanced as the demo suggested is a separate debate. But the company became, for a moment, a shorthand for a particular vision of where AI assistants were headed. Meta clearly thought that vision and the team building it were worth owning. The financial details of the original acquisition have not been publicly confirmed in the reporting I'm working from. What is confirmed is that the deal closed, that Beijing intervened after the fact, and that the founders are now scrambling to assemble the capital required to take the company back. $1 billion is not a small number. The fact that it is apparently being raised, rather than simply unwound through legal mechanisms, suggests two things. First, that Meta is not going to give the asset back for free. And second, that someone, likely a coalition of Chinese state-aligned investors, is willing to write a very large check to make sure this company ends up in Chinese hands. This is where the geopolitics gets sharp. For the past 3 years, the narrative around AI controls has been almost entirely about Washington tightening the screws. Export controls on advanced chips, restrictions on cloud access, outbound investment screening. Successive U.S. administrations have treated frontier AI as a national security category, and that has produced a steady drumbeat of U.S.-led friction. What this Manus episode signals is that Beijing now plays the same game in reverse. Chinese AI capability, the people, the models, the product surfaces, is also being treated as a strategic asset that cannot freely cross borders, even via legitimate, lawful corporate acquisition. And the mechanism here is worth pausing on. The CAC didn't block the deal up front through a merger review. It let the transaction close, watched what happened, and then forced an unwind. That is a far more aggressive posture than pre-clearance, because it tells every founder and every acquirer that closing the deal is not the end of regulatory risk. It might be the beginning. For Meta, this is an embarrassing outcome, but probably not a catastrophic one. The company has weathered worse on its balance sheet, and it presumably gets its capital back as part of the buyback structure. The loss is more reputational and strategic. A marquee AI acquisition unwound by a foreign government is not a headline any acquirer wants attached to its name. The more interesting question is what this does to Meta's broader AI strategy. Mark Zuckerberg has been on a very visible spending spree to assemble talent and capability. Some of that has gone through hiring, some through licensing, some, evidently, through M&A. If a chunk of that pipeline is now off limits because Beijing can void the deals after the fact, the calculus on how aggressively to chase Chinese-origin AI assets changes substantially. For the Manus founders, The situation is more ambiguous than it looks. On the surface, they're getting their company back. In practice, they're taking $1 billion of Chinese capital that almost certainly comes with conditions. To do so, independence is not really what's on offer here. What's on offer is operating inside one sphere of influence rather than another. And for the rest of the Chinese AI ecosystem, the message is unambiguous. If you build something that matters, you are a strategic asset. You can take foreign money up to a point, but you cannot sell yourself out of the system. The exit door to a U.S. acquirer, historically one of the most lucrative outcomes for a Chinese tech founder, is now visibly narrower. Now, some skepticism is warranted here. We are working off Bloomberg reporting and a summary that flags the key facts but leaves a lot of texture undefined. The exact terms of the unwind, the timing, the formal legal mechanism Beijing is invoking, the structure of the billion-dollar raise. These are details that will matter enormously, and that the public record so far does not fully resolve. I would expect the story to evolve as more sources talk. I would also be cautious about reading this as evidence that every U.S.-China AI deal is now dead. It is not a blanket policy announcement. It is a specific intervention against a specific company, presumably because Manus crossed some threshold in Beijing's eyes that other companies have not. What that threshold actually is, model capability, user base, data access, founder profile, is the most important unknown in this story. What I'm willing to say with confidence is this. The era in which AI M&A could be evaluated purely on commercial and antitrust grounds is over. National security review on both sides of the Pacific is now a first-order consideration. Any cross-border AI deal involving frontier capability is going to be priced with that risk baked in, and the discount is going to be real. Watch 3 things from here. First, watch whether other recently closed U.S.-China AI deals come under similar pressure. If Manus turns out to be one of many, this is a regime change. If it stays a one-off, it is a warning shot, but a loud one. Second, watch who actually writes the checks in the billion-dollar buyback. The composition of that investor group will tell you a lot about how directly the Chinese state is steering this outcome. A clean private syndicate looks very different from a roster of state-linked funds. And third, watch Washington's response. The U.S. government has its own tools, CFIUS, outbound investment rules, sanctions, and it has not been shy about using them. A reciprocal tightening from the American side is not just possible. It is, I think, likely within the next few quarters. The longer arc here is that AI is being treated finally and unambiguously as a sovereign technology, not a platform, not a productivity tool, a capability that states believe they need to control end-to-end, from chips to weights to the engineers who can train them. Manus, in that sense, is a useful case study rather than an isolated incident. A company small enough to be specific, large enough to matter, and now caught in a machinery of strategic competition that none of its founders signed up for when they started building agents. The next 12 months are going to produce a lot more stories that look like this one. The only real question is whether the deals get blocked at the front end, where everyone can see them, or quietly reversed at the back end, where the precedents are messier and the consequences harder to predict.